Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Summers. I'm Chief Officer of Transport East. We're the subnational transport body for Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, Southend and Thurrock, and great to see you all here today. So we've heard this morning about subnational transport bodies, and we've heard about how we set out multimodal, integrated, evidence-based transport strategies that deliver outcomes for people around economy, environment and society. But the title of the conference today is Joined Up Thinking, and those strategies on their own are not enough. It's the relationships that start to bring those strategies together. And we, as subnational transport bodies, lead those relationships at both a local, regional and national level. Our subnational transport body boards and forums are made up of businesses, of local authorities, of partners from the industry. The supply chain that are here today work with subnational transport bodies. And at a national level, we work with government, Network Rail, Great British Railways. And the focus of this discussion today is the importance of relationship with national highways. And what we're going to do today is run this in two parts. In a minute, I'm going to call to the stage three of our key leaders in the roads, national highways, DFT space. We're going to firstly have a presentation from Nick Harris, Chief Executive of National Highways, to talk through the relationship between National Highways and STBs, the key points that we've learnt over the last few years, and how we're going to build on that going forwards. Then I'm delighted to then follow that up with a discussion on stage with myself, with Philip Andrews, who's the Deputy Director of Future Roads at DFT, and Adam Simmons, Director of Strategic Planning and Analysis. So I'd like to call all three leaders up to the stage, please. Please can Adam and Philip sit here. And Nick, I'm going to call you to the stage to give your speech. Now, Nick, I know you have to leave straight after your speech, so we'll let you do that. And after that, we'll have the discussion. So Nick, please come up to the stage. And the other two, please come and sit here. Thank you.
Good morning. Morning, everyone. It's brilliant to be here today at the second Subnational Transport Body Conference. I was here last year, and it's great to be here again today, and to see so many colleagues from subnational transport bodies, DFT, and supply chain here, as well as other National Highways colleagues. I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes about relationships, about challenges, maybe a little bit about opportunities, and then hopefully that'll tee up a great conversation for the panel. Of course, our business is obviously roads, but it is all about relationships. So, as we've heard already this morning, it's the way that we work together, our relationships, the way we deal with the challenges and take the opportunities that will ensure that the UK will have the efficient and sustainable transport that we all need. So just sort of standing back for a moment and looking at what we've been doing in recent years, and thinking about some of the opportunities as well as challenges. So we've heard something about data. So we've moved from being the people that built roads and operated them to now our vision being one of service providers. So data becomes incredibly important about understanding who's using our roads, what they may want, how we build things. And you've also heard earlier about the challenges or opportunities that we're seeing in decarbonisation, in the environment in terms of driving biodiversity, air quality. And the innovation that all of these things give us the opportunity to drive and the opportunity to attract more and more people into the sector to generate new ideas. I find it pretty exciting. It's a lot more interesting than just filling potholes, I guess, although that does matter. So in the relatively short time that we've been working with all of the subnational transport bodies, we've made, I think, huge advances in building on those relationships, building very powerful coalitions that are enabling positive change across the whole of England, with the focus that we all have on economic, environmental, and social level initiatives. And I think that's an incredible achievement and one that we need to continue to build on. We're collaborating on a number of really important thematic work streams. So I mentioned decarbonisation, But I can add to that the electric vehicle charging infrastructure, provision for commercial vehicles, rural mobility, and the social aspects of all of that. And of course, a major part of our work directly, and you'll have seen it in the documents that we've recently published, is the creation of our route strategy overview reports, or our route strategies, which give a long-term view of the strategic road network that we're responsible for. So we're collectively continually collaborating on that so that our priorities and objectives are adjusted and aligned where possible. So just to give a few examples, I can't perhaps cover everything. So we've worked with Transport for the East on how we can build on our joint engagement and rise to the challenges we're seeing in the East. At the moment, the East for us is one of our busiest regions, and just finding enough road space to be able to do everything we want to do whilst continuing to provide great services is an enormous challenge. With Transport for the North, we've worked a lot on electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which, there are great policy view, but we have to work together on how we will make that a reality. And then with Midlands Connect, we've done a lot of work on not only the next road investment strategy, but also the ones after that. And I had a great visit a few weeks ago to East Midlands Airport. I thought East Midlands Airport was a kind of a sleepy provincial holiday airport, but boy, at night, does it become busy. It's our largest inland port for air freight. And of course, the connection to the strategic road network really matters, and it's all being developed into a free port. So it was fantastic to spend the night there and see what was going on, but also understand how we can connect to that more effectively going forwards. So as far as we're concerned, and I can't overstate how invaluable it is that each subnational transport body speaks for its region, its sense of place, with a single voice. And we heard from Minister Holden before, the bringing together of the disparate views of MPs, of all of the authorities within a region really, really matters and helps us to make sense of how we can connect with the strategies that we're developing. So with a clear view of all the challenges and priorities for each region, we're better able to focus investment where it will have its impact and where we can support all of you in your aims and objectives. So we have an action plan that we do work on each year with each of the 7 subnational transport bodies. That's refreshed each year, and that's a very important part of our work. And looking ahead, that relationship is only going to become even more important. We've talked already today about some of the headwinds that we face. Inflation, of course, being probably the most notable at the moment. We're having to cope with inflation. That does mean changing our priorities. That is a thing that is better done together so that we can continue to keep stable programs going, but deal with the impact of inflation. So we've had to slow down progress on some of the RIS3 development schemes, and some of the schemes that had poorer value for money are now being postponed for delivery in future road periods. We've also seen the rephasing of the construction of the Lower Thames Crossing project by 2 years, and the cancellation of future smart motorway project rollouts, where cost was the key factor. I mean, of course, these are disappointing decisions, but the strength we do have together is to reprioritize and to continue to focus on the things that matter. So as I mentioned earlier, we published 4 documents 2 weeks ago. We published our initial report, which sets out our thoughts for the next road period. We also published the route strategies I mentioned, and our vision out to 2050 for the strategic road network. I'll come to the 4th document we published in a minute. And of course, that's kicked off a consultation process which the DFT is leading on. The vision out to 2050 focuses on 9 topics. They include growth, levelling up, decarbonisation, asset resilience, amongst other things. And of course, to be successful in all of those, we need to work together. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes on asset resilience. So a lot of what we look after, of course, was built in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, a lot of it in the 60s and 70s. It's getting older. It comes as a bit of a shock to me that, crumbs, I was born in the 1960s, and I don't think of that as old, being relatively young as I am. But that stuff is getting old, and our looking after it, our renewal program, becomes ever more important. We're also seeing the impact of climate change on the resilience of the assets that we're looking after. So whilst we look at where we may want to enhance the network, it's really, really important that we look after the assets that we already have so they can continue to provide reliable service now and into the future and have the resilience to deal with climate change. All of that has to be done while delivering decarbonisation, not only as most of you are looking at a corporate level, but also in the construction and maintenance of everything that we do. And of course, the decarbonisation of the vehicle fleet. And that's where provision of more electric charging points becomes incredibly important as we shift and change our fleet. We're changing our fleet to be an electric one progressively. Still looking for a solution for the gritters. Could be hydrogen. And we're working with the DFT on a number of things like road freight trials, through our designated funds on providing electric charging in locations where there isn't a great connection to the grid. So we're sharing our thoughts on the future with the reports that I talked about earlier. You can find links to them if you've not already had a look at them on our website, and I don't know if maybe somebody can put it up on Slido for those that may not have seen them. The DFT-led consultation that I mentioned on the initial report will end on the 13th of July, and the consultation on the route strategies on the 11th of August. So please, I would encourage you to have a look and contribute to those. The fourth document we published alongside them was our environmental sustainability strategy. So our view of how we're going to work on environmental sustainability in terms of biodiversity, air quality, as well as decarbonisation. And we're now promoting environmental enhancement, not just mitigation. So for this current road period, our goal is no net loss in biodiversity. In future road periods, we're looking at promoting environmental gain on a landscape scale, and really seizing on the opportunity that as we develop roads, it can be a force for good and improvement of the landscape. So all of those documents present our view of the medium to long term, but we will only achieve that vision if we work and collaborate together at a local, regional and national level. And all I see into the future is even more opportunities to work together on these priorities, with the common aim of making journeys safer, smoother, more reliable, but also more inclusive, as well as being carbon efficient. So I'd like to thank everyone in the SDBs, DFT, and our other stakeholders here today for another year of strong collaboration, and looking forward to future years of collaboration and bringing about really positive change for everyone using our roads. Thank you very much, everyone. I'll hand back over to Andrew.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nick. And I know you've got to catch a train, but we really appreciate your time today. It's been a really insightful presentation, setting out how the SDBs and National Highways are working together. So for those of you using Slido, just a reminder that the code is STBC23. We've got a number of questions already coming through, and we're trying to incorporate them into the discussion So we're now going to have part B of this session to take you up to the break. This is the panel discussion. I'm delighted that we have Philip Andrews and Adam Simmons with us. Just to give you a quick introduction, Philip is the Deputy Director of Future Roads at the Department for Transport. He leads the development of the third road investment strategy, which starts in 2025 and covers investment in and the performance of England's motorways and strategically important A roads, and also the oversight of enhancements on the major road network. So great to have you with us, Philip. We also have Adam Simmons here today. So Adam's Director of Strategic Planning and Analysis at National Highways, responsible for Strategic Planning and Analysis Group, which has a number of responsibilities: the Chief Analyst Division, Network Planning, and Future RIS and Government Division, and been part of National Highways since 2017, I understand, where you joined from the Department for Transport, where you're also part of the senior leadership team there. So a huge amount of knowledge and experience on the stage with us. I'm going to kick off first with a question to Philip, please. The message that from government, the STBs, and everyone in the audience here is hearing today and over the last few months is that money is really tight for future transport investment. How is RIS3 going to deliver the priorities identified in the initial report that Nick outlined?
Thanks, and good to be here today, everybody. Quite a lot of familiar faces, and hopefully some friendly questions as well. I mean, Nick has highlighted there's pressure across the construction industry and inflation, across especially the road sector. I see it both in terms of the RIS, but also in terms of local authorities and their MRN projects as well. I think the government is committed to trying to deal with inflation. So as has been flagged, times will be tight. I'm not here going to talk about 2010. There were people there. I wasn't. But I think it's definitely going to be a challenge. I think the point about the focus on outcomes and users discussing the plan is really important. That reflects the fact that we should be talking about sweating the existing asset as much as possible and making sure we really focus on getting the most out of our asset. Obviously, some very hard choices have to be made already. The written ministerial statement back in March talked about some of the extended timelines on some of the big projects to allow us to deliver the programme overall. But I think it's largely going to have to be about real prioritisation, a kind of focus on, as already trailed in this report, on the maintaining the asset. Nick touched on it. And of course, the role of the STBs, local authorities, helping us to really prioritise what needs to be done, again, with that focus on outcomes and the user and what really matters at that level. A bit more of that, dare I say, a bit less transformational in that way we used to use it, possibly, and a bit more about transforming real people's lives as opposed to transforming something else.
Thank you very much, Philip. And Adam, moving on to a question to you, and I'm just starting to incorporate some of the things and themes coming through Slido as well. So some of the questions on Slido are talking about priorities, around a whole systems approach, around integrating local roads, national roads, the sorts of things that STBs are working on. And this is a question about working with STBs going forward. So as Nick mentioned in his speech, you've published the Route Strategy Initial Overview Report, the SRN Initial Report, and the Connecting the Country Report. Could you explain a little bit more how you went about working with the STBs, who are the custodians of the regional transport strategies, as you put those strategic documents together to start to incorporate things such as economy, environment? We've talked about it being World Environment Day today. How did you work with STBs as you developed those strategies?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I suppose two reflections. I mean, first, just actually on a very practical basis, I think actually over the past 2 or 3 years, and that's the period really we've been working on these documents, we've got to a point where actually it's a very business as usual engagement with STBs, which is very, very welcome. It's taken quite a lot of hard work to get there. In the quite formal engagement before, we produced particularly the route strategies, and bear in mind this was still at the end of the pandemic, so a lot of effort went into both sort of virtual and face-to-face meetings with STBs overall, with individual STBs. There was a huge amount of that sort of engagement, and certainly towards the end of the process, sharing with you, the documents, getting your feedback. Actually, to the point when I wrote round to my senior colleagues in National Highways, one colleague came back and said, thank you for sharing this, but do feel a little bit miffed that ORR Transport Focus, perhaps as you'd expect, but also STBs saw copies of this sort of well before we did. So hopefully we've got that right. What I would say is, actually, Andrew, to your kind of point then is, compared, I think, to the RIS2 route strategies, which perhaps had a bit of a sense of, here's a list of things. We very much wanted to structure this around the strategic objectives given to us by government, so around supporting the economy, providing reliable journeys, tackling safety, the environment, and then looked along those routes and say, well, which of these objectives are particularly important in these regions, in these areas? And given an understanding of those importance, what are the sorts of things we can do? What are those recommendations where we can give those options to government about how we tackle them? And what I would say is that engagement and that input from STBs in that space, previous panel talked about the why, really sort of setting out what we want to achieve and therefore how we can do it, I think has made it a much richer body of evidence than perhaps a RIS2, which had a bit of a listy feel to it. This is much more of a, this is what we want to achieve and how we can go about it.
Yeah, I think that reflects the maturity of the STB process, the way you've come together, the way you present these things. I mean, I articulate this as the corridor approach. It's much more, we're not dueling the AX anymore. We're looking at that corridor and working out those solutions together is a much more effective way of doing it. I hope also that colleagues feel that as we go through the consultation process in the final RIS, you undoubtedly will not necessarily like all the answers in it, but I hope you'll feel that you're more than just another bunch of stakeholders. You're partners in this conversation that will at least answer your questions, even if you don't like the answers in the document that we produce at the end of the day.
Just to expand on that point a bit further. So members of the audience here, most of them will have been involved in developing those route strategies. And collectively within them, there's about 100 route-specific recommendations that fall out of them. But we know, we've heard today, that the government isn't going to be starting any of those in the next third road period in terms of the major large schemes. So where does that leave all the recommendations that are in those route strategies? What's next for those?
I wonder if I can take that. I mean, I think actually perhaps there's a myth to tackle here. The Press Association article that kind of came out, obviously not written by either of us, had the headline, no highways, National Highways recommending no new schemes. Actually, that's not the case at all. So yes, on the 9th of March, there was a written ministerial statement saying that of the sort of larger pipeline schemes to be considered for RIS3, they will be considered now for RIS4. But these were sort of the quite big sort of civils projects. A lot of those, actually, I think it's near 140 recommendations sort of there, are quite targeted, actually, about making improvements to those corridors that Philip talked about. So, how we look at improving safety. So we're making the case with Philip and with the Minister around a programme of perhaps sort of around that sort of £5 to £20 million sort of schemes to improve safety, to tackle those 1- and 2-star IRAP rated roads, the sort of the lowest performing roads in terms of safety. And indeed, smaller schemes like junction improvements that can really help local journeys, better connections to local transport networks, supporting levelling up. Now, actually, of those, for relatively sort of modest amounts of investment, like I say, sort of that sort of £5 to £20 million sort of per scheme, you can get quite a lot of bang for your buck there. They offer extremely high value for money, good benefit cost ratios, and actually you can do quite a lot for that investment. So I think a lot of those recommendations are not the sort of big sort of civils projects, like Philip says, the widening of the sort of AX and what have you, but it's much more about targeted investment. And I think actually there is a real appetite, certainly for us as National Highways, to make those enhancements to meet a number of objectives, including safety, and I think actually it's something that government is quite interested in too.
Yeah, thanks. And Philip, do you want to come in?
I was just say, and just to add to that, there's a piece of small print in RIS2 that we forget about the pipeline, that of the 30-odd schemes, it didn't say all of them go into construction, it said all of them go into development, and they still have to make their cases. So even with a different financial envelope, it still might be the case that not all of them will proceed, and we might have been looking at different choices and options anyway. I think, as Adam said, we're looking at a smaller set of schemes, smaller outcome-driven focused ways of doing this. I think should produce still a very valid programme that will deliver what is needed for colleagues here want to deliver their local economies for growth.
Thank you very much. So looking forward, and Nick's speech referenced the honest and constructive conversations that have taken place, and there have been some quite honest conversations between National Highways and STBs in terms of developing the relationship, the storming, norming, performing process. What do you think the next steps are once this consultation period is over for the relationship between National Highways and STBs, and where are those future opportunities for increased collaboration going forwards?
From my perspective, I have a few reflections. I mean, I think first, one of the evolutions of the route strategies we want to take is that these are no longer sort of set pieces every 5 years. We want to sort of keep them as live documents, and we want to continue very much and increasingly so have that input from STBs. Ultimately, it's making those strategic cases for why we should invest along those corridors and what we're trying to achieve. So, very much want to continue getting that input, and of course, give that feedback to government as to where STBs sort of see the priorities, what we're trying to achieve for the constrained investment. I do think sort of increasingly going forward there are things like one of our strategic studies that we have to look at is how the strategic road network particularly interacts. It's called the urban SRN. I think it's a bit of a misnomer, but the sort of particularly interaction with sort of local transport networks. Really keen to sort of work with you all on that. My sort of belief is actually it's about finding some things we can really start doing. Let's sort of do those things. Let's build on that, and let's really try and make sure the strategic road network is genuinely integrated with local transport, local roads, but also rail as well. And I think as well, you talked about the longer term vision connecting the country that was published. We all know there are some real big challenges that we are collectively facing here. I really want to sort of be working with you all about how, again, we can start to sort of break those down into bite-sized chunks. Where is the investment? How do we start to build on what we're all doing, say, with providing the charging point infrastructure to support electric vehicles? There was a question on Slido about how you can help perhaps some of the smaller vans, smaller sort of minibuses and so on. So National Highways, we've got a program of investment where we can actually give local businesses the opportunity to sort of try before you buy, particularly with vans and so on. So you don't have to make that big investment. They can see that electric vehicle sort of works for them. I do think there's a myriad of small but really critical things we can all do together to tackle these. And for me, it's about identifying those, getting them in place, and then also having that longer-term vision about how we can, where we're all trying to get to.
And Philip, from the department's perspective, where's the room for collaboration between DFT, National Highways and STBs on this?
I mean, it's very similar to what Adam said. I think it's very much about, we have a rolling 5-year programme of RIS cycles, and there are upsides, downsides of that process, but it gives you a long-term commitment that sits alongside the long-term strategy of STBs. You can see that. Also, their STBs gives that kind of more granular. There could be a trade-off here, isn't there, between like a strategic vision. We also like a bit of granular feed at the right moment. Sitting where I do, looking at both the RIS and the major road network, I'm really keen to thinking about how we do that with much integration, and the STBs are really well fitted for that across the pieces. I mean, as I alluded to, we're getting increasing kind of, I would paraphrase as islands of kind of big chunks of improving public transport in big cities and increasingly smaller cities and towns. Yeah. And then we're trying to deliver the interconnection between that. Those joins require some really interesting thinking. I think the STBs play a really important role in that, at that kind of level. So it's that kind of relationship, I think, like I don't want to continue that kind of conversation, both, sensible, long-term strategic thinking, but the moment to be able to talk about nitty-gritty, how do we make this real, how do we get this onto the ground, and again, delivering for users now, not in 20 years' time.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. It's been a fascinating discussion. We are just about at the end of time, but I just wanted to reflect on some of the key themes that are coming through Slido. I've been taking a note of them as they've gone along. 3 broad categories, I think. Firstly, around the need for prioritisation, particularly given the lack of funding going forwards, and the need to understand what we spend the money on. And related to that, a second point around integration, so a much firmer integration between roads and other modes, and also between roads at a local level and the strategic and major road network. Strong themes coming through Slido. And another theme coming through Slido, which I hope people can pick up in our breakout sessions, is around decarbonisation and air quality. A number of people have commented on the fact it's World Environment Day, and we need the road network to be working harder to drive down carbon emissions. So that leads us into the end of this morning's session. Thank you all very much, previous panels and this one as well. Just to remind you of what's next, we have coffee served in the exhibition area now until 12 o'clock. The programme then continues, and we have 3 breakout sessions at 12 o'clock. Please get there as soon as you can. I understand it's a first-come, first-served service, and we'd like those to all start bang on 12. The first one is decarbonisation of transport. That will be back here in this room. The second one is supporting freight and logistics. That will be in room Vox 2, behind the partition here to my right. And the third one will be on rural connectivity. That will be in Vox 4, the left of this room, and access from this corridor. As I said, please be in those seats by 12 o'clock for a prompt start. But please can we give the panel members a round of applause and see you later. Thank you.